This one begins with cashew nuts, e-bikes and shopping trolleys, and we soon find ourselves talking about ethics and the granular decisions we make day in, day out. We reflect on the gap we notice and the dissonance we feel when who we want to be and the us that shows up sometimes feel too far apart. We celebrate how we can lean in and take note of our internal correcting mechanism that we have, which may feel like an ache, inviting us to bring our better and best selves to every situation. And we chat about finding a meaning-making story, a reference point that guides us, our decisions and our behaviours, and helps us become the kind of person we're truly seeking to be. The nature and identity of that story is truly fascinating, far-reaching and well worth thinking through. Enjoy the ride of this one. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Jill.
Again,
which is fantastic.
I know.
I've been looking forward to this.
I wonder what number this is. Who knows? Who knows?
But I've been looking forward to it because I love just sitting here chatting. It's wonderful.
Best thing of the day. Best thing of the day.
By far the best thing of the day.
Yeah.
It's all those meetings, if you know what I mean, with rigid agendas and you got to... This is just chilled.
I think it was last time or this 2 times ago, I bought you coffee because you had a busy day, but you've literally just stuffed your face with cashew nuts.
I had some nuts
before starting.
I know. Well, because I didn't get any breakfast. I know this is bad. You see, nobody's going to react. I didn't have a chance to have any breakfast this morning because a load of meetings and that Teams meetings, they're even worse, aren't they?
Sure are.
And then it got to lunchtime and I had a load of emails to do, to go. But I did have some cashew nuts, which are very good for you and very healthy. So I've just
that's all you need. That's all you need for today.
Well, I had some cashew nuts and some almond nuts. I listened to Michael Mosley. Have you heard of Michael Mosley? Just one thing. Health expert. He said nuts are good for you.
Nuts are good for you. So that's the one thing you've done.
I've had some nuts. Michael will be pleased.
Well done, Michael. So what are we going to talk about today then, Steve?
Well, you said we were going to talk about virtue ethics.
Which is very fancy.
Yeah, very fancy. So what got you into this?
Well, Lime bikes and shopping trolleys. I know that.
Lime bikes?
Yeah, Lime bikes. So for anyone that doesn't know, in London we have these things called Lime bikes, which are e-bikes. There's all sorts of varieties of e-bikes in London.
There's bikes everywhere, isn't there? They're Boris bikes and all sorts of things. But Lime bikes...
Particularly Lime bikes, there's just something I've noticed about Lime bikes and perhaps Lime bike users and also shopping trolleys. So here's the thing, and this to me has got everything to do with ethics, because when you hear the word ethics, you immediately think, oh, this is like the big, massive decisions that we might make or debate as a society, or euthanasia, guns, abortion,
the death penalty,
all of that. Yeah. But I want to talk about Lime bikes and shopping trolleys. And the reason is this, that I think that the ethics of an individual show up in the small things. So let me explain. Sometimes you can see me walking down the street in London and there will be Lime bikes just thrown on the floor. So people have used them, they've hired them, and then they've just thrown them on the floor when they've finished using them. And it's like when you go to the supermarket and people have used the trolleys, but they don't take them back to where the trolleys should be kept. They just leave them in the middle of the car park or in the middle of the pavement. And the more you think about it, the more you realise that's an ethical decision.
Yeah, all those things. And chucking all the stuff you don't want out of your house and just leaving it on the street for people to trip over. Dog poo. Yeah. They're all ethical decisions, aren't they? And small decisions are ethical decisions. The way I react or respond or write an email or whatever. Yeah. All of that.
Yeah. And it's, I often think that it's those things that tell you more about a person's character than anything that anyone can ever put in their CV, for example, and all the rest of it. And I know that I'm not perfect, so I'm not saying that about this, but it's just interesting that it's in those things. And then the other day, I had to make a phone call to British Gas. There was a mistake, a system error. So it wasn't my fault. It belonged to the system, just to be clear. And I had prepared the best speech about what was wrong with the system and who was to blame, and it wasn't my fault and all the rest of it. And I was on hold and it was going on and on and on. The music was really annoying and I was getting more frustrated. And then a voice came on the line, and it was this man, and he just said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" And I thank God, I paused just for a moment, caught my breath, and just was able to somehow regroup and go, okay, so I'm speaking to a human being. I don't want to offload all of this anger and frustration and everything else onto him. And I managed to find the words to say, "I'm doing okay, but I really need your help." And that was, because I could have really gone off on one. And that was an ethical decision.
Yeah, they're all ethical decisions, and they're hard to make, aren't they? So I'd say two things. I agree with you on two things. One is your caveat. There's always this kind of aching gap between what we'd like to be and what we actually are.
Absolutely.
Our aspiration or my aspiration, my actual achievement. There's a big thing between those. But the thing is, you've got this self-correcting mechanism inside, haven't you? So when when I was unkind, or I didn't listen, or I didn't respond, that little thing tugs at you, which is a good thing, isn't it? It's frustrating, but the frustration is good, because I always think the fact that I'm frustrated with my performance, what I said, what I did, how I reacted or responded is good for me, because you're self-editing.
Yeah.
It's that little inner voice, isn't it?
The reflective practitioner, isn't it, in you?
But I also think that on the whole, in the end, well, the way I always think about it, if you've got a tube of tomato ketchup and you squeeze it, tomato ketchup comes out. If you squeeze it a bit harder, more tomato ketchup, a bigger flow comes out. If you put it on the floor and jump on it, tomato ketchup sprays absolutely everywhere. The point is, the tube can only spray, or you can only squeeze out what's in. And the more pressure you apply, the more of what's inside comes out. And then you get, people say, they snap and they get really angry and, they hit out at somebody. I was on a bus the other day and someone laid into the bus driver with such anger. And you realise that it's what's inside them that's coming out. And sometimes we say, I know I was angry, but, I was tired. It was a long day. I'd had a tough time. I'd been on a rough phone call. I had a bit of a headache. And I understand all that because I understand it about myself. But in the end, what's inside us comes out. It leaks out all over the place, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In our responses, in our reactions, all of the time.
So really what you're saying, and I totally agree with you, is there's something about this internal compass story that's being played out, it's almost like a magnetic thing that you always find your way back to in all of those moments, isn't it? That you're working out the ethics of how you want to be, how you want to behave, what kind of person is it that you want to be. But you're really clever because you've written loads of books. How many books have you written?
I'm not clever enough. No, I'm not clever at all. But I've written a lot. 70 more. I don't know.
Enough.
Yeah, enough.
There's a new one coming out really soon.
I have got a new book coming out later on this year. It comes out in September, and it's called I forgot what it's called now.
Manifesto.
A manifesto for hope. And no, I'm excited about it. And when I said I've written enough books, and that's what my wife, Cornelia, says to me, you've written enough books. And that's what I know. In fact, I promised her it's the last book I'm ever going to write until I'm retired. Because the truth is, you have to put so much in it. When you got enough, if you're a writer, it's fine. But, I do all these other things and try to write in my spare time. It took me about 2 years to do. But it's about how we create hope, transformation, opportunity for every child, every young person and every family in the country. And it's 10 principles I've learned about community development over the years. So
available
there you go.
At all good bookshops.
Yeah, but I have written it. I think you was going to say
Amazon.
All on that kind of stuff. But I wrote a book about ethics.
Yeah.
It was called Different Eyes.
Oh, that was it.
I think it was, yeah.
And in there, you do this. It's such a good book, but you talk about the different kinds of approaches to ethics that there are. So you talk about, I like this word, deontological ethics. Yeah. Like, what is that?
What is that? Deontological, yeah. There are only 3 types of ethics in the whole world. So everybody, this is the incredible thing, everybody's ethical system is based one of 3 ways, and sometimes get muddled up. A bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of the other. And deontological ethics, it's a Greek word. It just means obligation ethics, and so it's really about rules. The 10 Commandments, or the 2 golden commands: love yourself, love your neighbour as yourself. Or love yourself and always love others and always tell the truth. Some people say, somebody said to me the other day, always tell the truth and love other people. And if you live your life by rules, that's called deontological ethics. But there's a big problem with it. That's the problem with a rules-based approach to life. Well, we all know, the office handbook, the rules don't always work. We all know, the policy, the tick box approach to life, it doesn't always work. The rules that were made yesterday don't always work for the situation today. I've got 4 kids, and I taught each one of them never to cross the road on their own. I told them, I told them to always hold hands with someone before they cross the road, never to open the door to somebody they don't know. Yeah. But the problem is, one of them's 41 now.
It would be a bit weird.
And the youngest, the youngest.
Emily?
Emily. And so they go down in 2 years, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So the youngest, Josh, is well into his 30s and married and has got 2 kids who he has to teach don't cross the road without holding hands. Yeah. But the point is, those rules apply at one point and then you move beyond them. I always think it's, with the risk of talking too much about it, and then we should talk about deontological rules and all the rest. It's a bit like map makers. I always feel sorry for map makers. Even now everybody uses GPS or whatever on their phone, whatever it is, Google Maps. The maps are always kind of wrong, aren't they? Because they're out of date.
As soon as they're done, they're out of date, aren't they?
Yeah, and it says drive up this road, but it's now a one-way system, and you can't drive up it. And they've built a block here, and they've cordoned off this and all the rest. So you feel sorry for map makers, don't you? Digital ones or paper ones, because they're mapping yesterday.
Yeah.
And the map keeps changing. So that's why rules don't work. And to sum it all up, say you've got these 2 rules. It's to love your friends and to always tell the truth. Well, what if you're watching the television one day and you see a news report about a mad axe murderer in your community and the police are warning, and this mad axe murderer, you see his picture and you hear that he only murders old age pensioners, people who claiming a pension, elderly citizens. And then the doorbell goes, and you open the door, and you recognise that it's the mad axe murderer. And the mad axe murderer very politely says, I hear that the person living next door to you is retired. Now,
would that be true?
Yeah. Do you tell the truth or do you love your neighbour?
Yeah.
You see, so rules break down. So that's why deontological ethics, people kind of moved away from them a lot.
Yeah.
And then the second type of ethics is called situational ethics, sometimes called utilitarian ethics or consequence ethics, consequentialist ethics. And it means doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people for the greatest number of time. It means I'll use my common sense to work out what's the best thing to do in this circumstance.
Pragmatism. Yeah.
But the problem with that is that often we don't know. And, the decisions I make at the age I am now are different to the decisions I would have made when I was 30 or 40. Yeah. So if we're just going on our own best understanding, hey, if it feels good, do it. If it sounds good, do it. Often the thing that sounds good, that feels good at any one particular time, with a bit of hindsight, we go, oh, no, why did I do that or say that or think that or respond to that? And so a guy called Aristotle, a long time ago, he came up with what we call virtue ethics.
Yeah.
And what Aristotle said, this long time back, as you know, Aristotle saw that deontological ethics didn't work, saw that situational ethics, what feels good, do it, doesn't work. And he said virtue ethics are the only way to do it. And by that he meant a story. The great story, the meaning-making story of your life that you live in, let that story guide you. That story, that community story, communal story that you live in, that story should guide you, because only that story is powerful enough to allow you to make the right decisions at the right time.
And I suppose that story, so if we take the Jesus story...
Yeah.
What that story does, for example, is it causes those that follow that way of Christ to develop a particular set of traits or character. We've talked about it on another episode about the fruit of the Spirit, the traits of love and joy and peace and and so your virtues, I think, if I'm understanding it right, what you're saying, Steve, is you make your decisions, your choices are determined by the character that is formed out of the meaning-making story that you base your life upon. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's right. So
the reason I say it is because Jesus didn't say anything. For example, Jesus didn't say anything about how you use the internet. Or do you know what I mean? So it has to...
Yeah, or
all sorts of things.
Yeah, that's it. Whether you should answer a mobile phone
or
when
not.
you're with someone.
Yeah.
Exactly. Not much to say about a whole load of things, did he? He didn't say choose Apple over IBM. So there's a whole lot of things and much bigger things.
That
Jesus didn't talk about. Huge issues that confront us today, like the issue of assisted dying, for instance. Jesus didn't talk about all those things.
AI.
The list goes on and on, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
So stocks and shares, and mortgages, and all the rest of it. So the thing is that you guided by this story. The story, in my case, of Jesus, as you say, who has been, if you like, my mentor from afar since my teens. And you're kind of working out, so what do I think would have happened, Jesus would have done in this situation, or the ethics that he taught, the stories that he taught mean for how I behave and react and respond in this situation. And I think it's a bit like learning to play jazz music, as I always say. So when I was a kid, my mum sent me to piano lessons every Wednesday afternoon at 4:00 after school. In fact, she came with me to make sure I went. And I lived in South Norwood in South London, and I used to carry my music book with all the notes in, up the hill. And at the top of South Norwood Hill, I used to...
Was it a little leather satchel?
It was. And I only used it on Wednesdays, that day of the week, for that, which was disappointing, really. And then I used to go and see my piano teacher and Miss Owen. And we wait in her hallway, and then we go into her lounge, I suppose it was. And there was a piano, upright piano. And my mum would wait outside. And then it was an incredible thing I did each week, because I would try to convince Miss Owen that I had practiced since the last time, which of course I hadn't, because that's why I only ever opened my little leather satchel
on a Wednesday.
On a Wednesday, when Miss Owen thought I opened it every day. And Miss Owen would attempt to demonstrate to me that she believed me when I said I'd practiced every day, which she clearly didn't, because she knew. And we go through this ritual every Wednesday until, this is off the point actually, until one Wednesday she broke down crying. Honestly, she just broke down in tears and rushed out the room. And that was the last time I ever went. And I never spoke to my mum ever about why I never went, because I assumed...
You broke her.
I assumed it must be that I broke Miss Owen down. And it was only years and years later, after worrying about this, that I realised there must have been bigger things going on in Miss Owen's life.
Dear God, I hope so, because otherwise that's a really bad story.
Yeah, I'm sure that she was having a tough time for whatever reason, and she decided to give up piano lessons or whatever.
That chalk boy anyway.
Yeah. So it's not. But the point was, if I'd have really practiced and I'd be able to play. Now, I was watching Elton John playing at Glastonbury, the other week, and like the ability to just your fingers dance across the keys. Yeah. There's so many just great piano players in bars and places like that, and I wish beyond anything else I could play the piano brilliantly well. It's kind of, amazing. Yeah. But I can't. Although I can still play in a very lumpy style the 3 tunes that I did learn. One's called The Dance of the Tin Soldiers.
Brilliant.
It's kind of... Now, the problem is that The Dance of the Tin Soldiers isn't very appropriate for most things. In fact, in all the years I've known how to play it, it's never been appropriate for any gathering, really. It's just... But if I could play jazz...
Yeah.
I could take the principles I learned about keys, which I didn't learn, and runs and chords, etc., and I could apply and virtue ethics according to Aristotle. This is me. He didn't have jazz music back then. It's what Aristotle was saying is play jazz.
Yeah, you got to do the work. You got to practice.
Yeah. And you got to know what the story is. In fact, Aristotle said that he said that everybody should have a telos.
Yes.
Which means the end goal of life, the aim. You see, for me, that's to imitate in my broken way the life of Jesus. It really is. Yeah. But Aristotle, who lived before Jesus, of course, he said, and wouldn't have been a Christian anyway, he said, your telos. Yeah. And he said, if you pursue your telos through life, he said, what you achieve is eudaimonia, another Greek word.
Okay.
And it means the good life.
Of course, yeah.
The good life. You achieve the good life, the best in life, the richest life, by seeing it all through a lens, pursuing a telos.
Yeah.
And learning to play jazz with it within.
Yeah, which is amazing, and I'm totally with you. So to me, it's like you find the thing on which your life then pivots. You find that expression that you've used, we've used it in other conversations, this meaning-making story, a source of purpose, intention, something that's outside of yourself.
So you live on purpose.
Yeah.
And for me, my story very well. Unfortunately, you've had to listen to it endless times. But
about 3 times a month for 26 years.
As we explain it to new staff and volunteers. But when I was 14, I was given a telos, just as I wandered up that street, by Crystal Palace Football Club, and I was given this thing. I knew what my life was about, and it was anchored in the youth. The story of the youth club I went to was a church, and the outcomes of that for me, which is about setting up a school and housing and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So that telos has guided me. And so you end up living on purpose. That doesn't mean you don't wander off the pathway a bit and muck up, but you know when you're mucking up.
Yeah, you feel like I feel it when I'm mucking up. Like it's not. It doesn't diminish me as a person. It just I'm like, oh no, that's off. That was off, Jill. You know, I can think of something I said yesterday, and immediately I had the that was off. That didn't come out right, or if I could take those words back, that and so that kind of, like I say, that pivot point, that story on which everything else is based, it's like just this most beautiful guiding principle and person that you, like you say, mentors your life through for you.
And the interesting thing about Aristotle, I mean, because he was the person, you can go to the greatest library in the world, you can go study ethics at university, you can do a PhD in it, and everyone will point you back to Aristotle and virtue ethic, and that obviously this has been studied and written about through the centuries since. But the interesting thing, because of the big thing you do within Oasis, is around the 9 habits, and all the fantastic work that you put out for use in our schools and with our staff and in induction and leadership training and all the rest of it. Well, Aristotle had 9 habits. He didn't call them 9 habits. He had 9 virtues.
Yeah.
And they weren't ours.
No.
Because they arose out of a different story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they arose out the story of Zeus and the Greek gods. Now, Zeus was the god of fire and anger, etc., etc. So Aristotle came up with 9 of virtues, character of virtues. And the incredible thing was that, and you can read about them, much of his writing still exists, and our 9 habits are a reaction against, or to, I should say, Aristotle's 9 habits, which I'll leave you to explain in a minute. But Aristotle became a teacher for a while. Well, he was a teacher. He became a teacher of school children, if you see what I mean.
Academy.
Yeah, exactly, where the name comes from. And his most famous student was Alexander the Great. Before he was the Great, he was just Alexander. I think he was 14 or something.
Known for his peacemaking, right, Steve?
He was a megalomaniac.
Yeah.
And he, they say that he wept when he realised there were no more nations to conquer. He built this huge empire of just wiping whole people groups out. He was driven. I mean, he was dead at the age of 32.
Yeah.
And then his empire fell apart because he'd never built loyalty and they all warred against each other, his generals, and the whole thing collapsed into the ground. But he guided his life through Aristotle's virtues. And then, knowing that, in a different age, Paul, the follower of Jesus, who we call the Apostle Paul now, he came up with...
the fruit of the Spirit.
9 habits.
Yeah.
And it's in, I often say to people, Aristotle is probably the biggest influence on Paul's writing, the New Testament, that is never mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because everybody took it for granted, because Paul was a Jew, but he was a Greek and he grew up in a university town and they studied ethics. It was the centre. It was the
oxygen, wasn't it, that he was breathing in.
So everybody knew about Aristotle's whole idea about virtue ethics. And what Paul's saying is, we've got some different habits.
Yeah. Which are countercultural, revolutionary, and create a very different outcome, don't they? The end game of Paul's 9 habits, or the fruit of the Spirit, are just completely different. And it's just fascinating, isn't it? Because you realise the influence that Aristotelian thinking still has today about being mighty and powerful and dominant, and how that, I mean, if you think from social media, self-promotion, political leaders, parliamentary ethics committees, the whole thing is, you can just see all of this permeating everything, can't you? And then there's this voice that speaks a different way, and a different set of virtues.
And Aristotle's virtues, they were all about power, and then being magnanimous when you reach
Self,
the top
wasn't
of the
it? It was
mountain.
all about self.
The development of yourself, self-actualization, and then you were magnanimous with those who were below you. They're also just about men. And you see all that played out all the time.
Yeah. So the Jesus story for you, and also for me, becomes the reference point, the way of being, our ethical compass point, I guess.
You win looking like you're losing. You can afford to take the lower part.
You don't need all of the trappings. But what's interesting for me, Steve, is knowing that this Aristotelian thinking, that kind of ethics is so powerful still today. And you talked about the Jesus piece, and we read about that in the Bible. But it's just interesting, isn't it, when you go back, right, even to the poem about creation, way back in Genesis. The way of love was hidden in that story. That the Genesis poem was in contrast to a violent story. It was describing that the way of God is a way of love, and that everyone matters, and that everyone is precious, and that men and women are equal, and violence isn't the way. So there's this narrative is breaking out through. It's hidden, the way of love. It just strikes me that the way of love is often hidden from view from people. And I just wonder for how we can help one another to keep discovering and choosing to look for the way of love when it comes to ethics. So go back to the line bikes, go back to the shopping trolleys, go back to chucking rubbish everywhere, go to all the little things, to the phone calls, to the email responses, to the reactions. The way of love is often hidden in those moments, but that's what we've got to do.
If that's the story you want to live in.
Yeah.
People can look into this at any level. I forgot what my book's called about it. Different Eyes. I'm sure it's called Different Eyes. Yeah. But the big book about this is called After Virtue, and it was written by Alastair McIntyre, After Virtue. And when I say the big book, I mean it's like I was looking around the Tate Modern at some Impressionist painting with my wife Cornelia a few months ago, who loves art and all the rest of it, and then in the discussion about these styles. You listen to these people they talked about Alastair McIntyre and they talked about After Virtue. And when you went down, you go, you always buy things on the way out, prints of everything. Yeah. And they had a stack of Alastair Tyre's book, After Virtue. So, art chases after this, music chases after this. How do you capture a story worth living in? How do you paint that story? How do you picture that story? What does it sound like? This is a big thing. Jill, you and I spent this last Saturday together, and on a very sad, but in another way, a joyous occasion because of the death of your sister. Some weeks
we had a
ago.
Thanksgiving, which was amazing. Thank you for speaking at it, by the way, Steve. It was amazing, wasn't it? And my brother-in-law spoke.
Yeah. So your brother-in-law, Chris, married to Chrissy, your sister, your older sister, and tragically, she died of brain cancer some weeks ago after a long struggle. So that was both tragic and a release as well. And then, last Saturday, Chris, your brother-in-law, as you well know, invited me to speak at the celebration of her life. But the extraordinary thing, which is a story I told everybody there, the extraordinary thing is that Chris came to see me. I've known Chris for as long as I've known you, type of thing, or almost as long. But he came to see me because he'd asked me to speak at Chris's celebration. He came to see me down in London. We had a meal together just to talk about it. And Chris is a farmer, highly intelligent farmer who studied geography at Oxford, and being with him, listening to him talking about the land one way or the other is an extraordinary thing anyway. But he said this really moving thing to me, which I repeated back, and he spoke something of it at the conversation he'd had with me on that for that lunch, because he said to me, he said, I see everything, Steve, in terms of land and geography. I picture that in my head all the time. And he said, and I've lost my wife, and for me it feels like I'm stuck in my present circumstances, and the terrain I'm in is unfamiliar, and it's really difficult to navigate. And he said it's like the fog's rolled in and I'm lost in the fog and I'm lost in the mud, and it's uncomfortable and it's lonely and I'm all over the place and I don't know where I am. He said, and he said the only way through it, I've learned over the years, because I am a farmer and I've been physically in this situation when the mist comes down, the only way through it is to look at the horizon. And you have to steer yourself by the horizon rather than the present circumstances. So you've got to lift your eyes to the horizon. You've got to use your compass, that's what he said, rather than the map of these particular circumstances. And he said, and that's how I feel at the moment. I've never been here before, and it's really scary, but I keep looking at the horizon, and then I know which way to go. And I repeated that story, the story he told me, because I was just thinking it's just a fantastic metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But for us all. And that's really what Aristotle was talking about, and it's really what Paul the Apostle was talking about when he gave us the Oasis 9 habits, as we now call him. He said, look at the horizon, and in the circumstances of your day and the difficult decisions you've got to make about your neighbour or your family or somebody's been upset with you or what you should do, try to guide yourself by this great example and this great story.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes on the horizon.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to finish. I was just as you're telling that story, and I was thinking about Saturday, and there's just something for me, Steve, in all of life, whenever you find yourself stuck, is just to look up, isn't it? Just to look up. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Jill.